Already did. Now we've got Pulitzer Prize winning historian John Meacham. John, what a show last night. It would have been wonderful had it not been the President of the United States speaking. But let's talk about the President of the United States saying he's the most presidential of all presidents other than Abraham Lincoln. And I'm dead serious. I actually ask you this as a Pulitzer Prize winning historian. If you just take his 44 predecessors, their behavior, and the restraint they showed at times, the decision-making process, their management styles, is it safe to say that, in fact, Donald Trump, by a comfortable margin, is the least presidential of all 45 presidents that have occupied that office?
I think it's more than safe at this point. And we have the videotape, as they say. And I love that Abraham Lincoln now is identified as the late, great Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if you know this, but he was a Republican and he's dead. And a lot of people don't know that, as Trump would say. One of the things is, and maybe one of the tragedies, one of the many tragedies of this era is Trump understanding enough to know that there is a presidential mode, that there is a way of being in this office, a way of projecting both what Walter Bagehot used to call the dignified and the efficient parts of government. He kind of knows that's supposed to be there, but his ultimate, I think, contempt for any norms that have bound his predecessors to reality, and his really unremitting self-regard have just prevented him from, I think, in any way occupying the office in a way that that anyone will look back on and say, hey, why didn't we ever think of that before? And it could have been different. You know, one of the tragedies here is that it was probably worth sending an unconventional person into the Oval Office. It's just that this is the one that got sent.
Exactly.
Well, and unfortunately, the great irony of yesterday's speech was that he said that he could act presidential anytime he liked, and it was easy to do that. Sadly, over the past 6 months, he has proven that's actually impossible for him to do, and it's impossible for him to do even as his poll numbers go down, as his disapprovals go up, and it would be in his best interest to behave that way, but he is incapable of it. Let's turn pages and actually talk to somebody who actually did speak yesterday and was on a higher plane politically and philosophically and every other way, who actually acted statesmanlike, acted what we like to think of as presidential, and that is John McCain, who gave a remarkable speech on the Senate floor yesterday. Put Senator McCain's speech into perspective for us this morning historically.
I think it's why we have the Senate. It's a reminder. We've talked about this before. Aaron Burr once said that if we ever are to survive demagogues and usurpers, it will be on the floor of the United States Senate. McCain took a long view. People can disagree about his vote. He made a big point that he was an imperfect messenger of this. He's always been humble in that way. But he really framed the issue of the age and of the ages really well. He talked about passion versus reason. And we're at a moment now where, in that perennial struggle, passion wins hour to hour and day to day and tweet to tweet in a way that is going to ultimately be corrosive to the republic. And McCain's voice here, McCain, 30 years in the Senate, served in the House, the son and grandson of admirals, a man who's, if you read his books, he's very clear that he's not a perfect guy. And he said that yesterday. But he did talk about the need to try to put the cause ahead of the self. And that's something we can't hear enough because we have a president who does the exact opposite.
It was a beautiful moment when he came in, and a beautiful speech. Casey Hunt, let's now go to what happened on Capitol Hill yesterday with health care. In a nutshell, what went down?
Well, you saw them take, and this was set up as this giant moment. Let's not lose sight of the fact that this really was simply to start talking about how to repeal health care on the Senate floor. McCain, obviously, hugely the focus, very emotional, as you were just going through with John Meacham, and he, essentially argued, look, we're not doing anything here. And I think he captured very much the feeling among Republicans that the Senate is really stuck. Now, what's going to happen next? They are going to start talking about this overnight. There were 9 Republicans that voted against what's called the BCRA. Essentially their big deal that they've been working on for weeks. It would have taken 60 votes to pass. Of course, it didn't. And then we're expecting today that they'll take a vote on an amendment that will amount to that clean repeal, essentially a repeal of Obamacare without replacing it. Leaders don't believe they have the votes for that either. They would need 50 votes. It doesn't look like they're going to get it. So there's still this open question about what happens next. It sounds like they're going to start to cobble together something they're calling a skinny repeal. I think at this point, the president just looking for a win. It's really not clear how this is going to affect millions of Americans.
And that's what John McCain was talking about. He was saying we've got to stop trying to win just for the sake of winning. Eddie?
Yeah, I was really confused by Senator McCain's actions yesterday. I thought it was admirable of him to return to the Senate. I thought the speech was, in fact, important. But part of what's the problem today is the kind of way in which we measure our words against our actions. Because after he delivered those words, right, how did he vote?
Well, to debate.
Right, to debate. And then he voted for, didn't he vote for one of the actual, one of the amendments I think he also voted for. So I think part of what we see in this moment in our cry for statesmanship, right, is some consistency, some principle, some commitment, some value animating our actions. And so the question I keep asking myself about the Republican effort around health care, what is the animating value? What are they trying to do?
Well, they're trying to fulfill not just a campaign promise, but honor the issue. There is not a parallel in our times in which a political party has taken more money from its constituents to enact a promise on than repealing Obamacare. They really are under such tremendous pressure to repeal this. Now it's hard to see how they do that, of course, but that's their motivation.
But Joe, isn't that?
Well, no. Hold on. I've got to jump in here. I'm sorry. That's not their motivation. I mean, that may be some of their motivations, but there are a lot of Republicans. I was a former Republican. There are a lot of small government conservatives who were offended by the passage of Obamacare, who did not believe that the federal government should compel people to buy insurance, should not compel young people to buy health insurance if they do not want to buy health insurance. Now, you can find that offensive. Not you. I'm just talking anybody can find that offensive if they want to find that offensive. You can think ideologically that people like us are short-sighted to not believe that the state should compel people to buy health insurance if they don't want to buy health insurance.
I totally understand
that. But there are millions and millions and millions of Americans who believe that. And Eddie, I just want to take exception with something you said about John McCain. Just because John McCain didn't vote the way you wanted him to vote, just because John McCain doesn't believe what you believe in when it comes to the central state managing 1/6 of the economy the way that Barack Obama and Big Pharma and the American Health Association and all the other special interests that put together Obamacare in 2009 wanted to manage 1/6 of the state. That doesn't mean that John McCain's actions were less honorable yesterday. It means that he just believes differently than you, and it also means that he believes we should move forward in the debate. Would I have voted that way? No. But I would be careful about saying, yes, he came back, he gave an honorable speech, but he didn't vote the way I wanted him to vote. Therefore, I'm confused, and I'm not exactly sure how to take that. I take that as a conservative Republican who's been a conservative his entire life, who came back, condemned partisanship, and said, let's talk and let's figure out how to work this out. He wants to go to regular order. He wants Democrats and Republicans to work together, Eddie.
Eddie.
Well, part of what I was trying to, he's very critical of the current bill that's before the Senate, right? Or what constitutes the bill. So part of what I was trying to do, and the point I was making, is that I was confused about what he was supporting once he allowed, or once he voted for us to move, or the Senate to move to debate. I understand that. I think you're absolutely right that supporting moving to debate isn't a big deal that much, at least to a certain degree. But I was confused by the subsequent vote. So I'm not, Joe, I understand the point. I'm not begrudging someone for holding their position. Yeah. I think people can be held accountable for the positions that they hold and the consequences that follow.
And they should be.
So, Joe, let me ask you about those positions, though, because I understand what you're saying about ideological differences. I understand what you're saying about sticking to conservative principles. And I understand the point of view that many Republicans, and especially on the far right, but many Republicans were deeply offended by the concept of Obamacare and wanted to repeal it. But isn't that politically past due at this point? I mean, people have it. It doesn't work that great. It needs to be fixed. Everyone agrees with that. You could ask any Democrat, does Obamacare need to be fixed, amended, transformed in some way? Of course. But isn't it politically past due to take away health care, whether you were for it or not?
Well, I don't, again, taking away health care is not the way a lot of Republicans would frame it. They would say,
that's fine.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. They would say giving people a choice on whether they want to purchase health care or not without being compelled by the centralized state. And that is an ideologically motivating figure.
I'm not debating the ideology with you.
So I personally believe that like John McCain. Well, let's talk about John McCain. What is John McCain's central argument? What has he been saying all along? He's not been talking about substance as much as he has process. And in this case, John Meacham, process matters more than anything. He's been talking about regular order. Because if you're a conservative like me, there's a reason why the type of health care bill that I've wanted, which is one that completely reforms health care and actually infuses more free enterprise concepts in, will never get off the starting blocks because they don't have hearings. They don't have regular order. They don't grapple with it for 2 years trying to figure out how do we get some of the free market into health care so people are responsible for the choices that they make. They can't do that when Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan get 3 or 4 staff members together and say, write our bills in the back room. And isn't that what's wrong with Washington right now as much as anything? That we're not having Republicans and Democrats rolling up their sleeves and working for 2 years, which is what they need to do, to really reform health care so we could bend the cost curve and we could give people better health coverage.
Yeah. At the risk of total self-parody, I was thinking yesterday about the way the Constitutional Convention worked. You know, they shut the windows, they made it as hot as possible in Philadelphia because they knew that as they debated, if people staked out a position early or in the middle of the process and ended up someplace else, they'd be killed politically. They'd be accused of hypocrisy, of being squishy. That's what's happened today, right? I mean, there is no debate. There's very little actual thought. The role of reason is not playing the role it should in the arena because the bases of both parties hold people accountable to these purist tests all the way along. And so if you have a hearing and you ask, and God forbid you should actually ask a question to which you might want to know the answer, then you know you're sort of seen as wandering off the reservation. And I think that's what McCain was talking about. I think he was talking about having a process where there was an actual exchange of ideas. We can disagree, but at least there'd be an exchange.
Yeah, I just think the repeal for repeal's sake might be not constructive for Republicans who want to be reelected. We started the block with a soundbite from the president speaking last night in Youngstown, Ohio. Joining us now from Capitol Hill, the Democratic congressman from Ohio, who represents that district, Representative Tim Ryan. Good to have you on the show this morning. I want to dive into the health care debate with you in just a moment, but I'm curious about the motto or slogan that the Democrats have come up with. What is it again? I can't. A better deal.
It's great, less filling.
Tim, it's not good.
Well, first, I want to thank President Lincoln for showing up in my district yesterday.
Thank God, yes.
If I knew he was going to be there, I would have went back home to hear the speech. I think that I'm not a real slogan person. I think it's a good first step because it's an agreement among Democrats that we need to talk about economic issues, and I think that's a good sign. We're going to talk about jobs. We're going to talk about the economy. We're going to talk about growth. We're going to talk about opportunity. Those are all really good things. I would like to see it be a little bit more aspirational instead of just transactional in the concept of tax credits and the kind of pieces that were in there. I think we need a little bit more of an aspirational message as to what does the country look like? What's America 2.0 look like? And why can the Democrats help working class people in places like Youngstown experience the American dream in that new economy?
Mark Halperin?
What do your constituents who voted for Donald Trump believe in that you also believe in?
Well, I think they want affordable health care. I think they want jobs. They want to see more investment into communities like Youngstown. And the funny thing about this, Mark, is that that's what he campaigned on. He campaigned on expanding health care, Medicare, Medicaid. It's going to be beautiful. Everybody's going to be able to afford insurance. He talked about $1 trillion transportation and infrastructure bill, which would completely make huge investments into towns like Youngstown across the country. They're in total agreement on that. The problem is, the opioid crisis. He said he was going to try to deal with that issue, which is very big in places like Ohio. But in each instance, the transportation bill, he hasn't even put something in front of Congress. It's not like he's saying, look, I have a jobs bill in front of Congress, $1 trillion, we're going to get people back to work, drive up wages, shrink the labor pool. He doesn't even have it here. And then on the health care piece, he's going backwards by supporting 2 bills, both in the House and the Senate, that are throwing people off of health care, making it more expensive and reducing coverage for things like addiction and treatment. So he's gone backwards on those things.
Congressman Ryan, Elise Jordan here. You have vied for a leadership role in the Democratic Party, and right now, it certainly seems to be, confusing to figure out who is leading the Democratic Party. What do you see on the horizon for this party, and who do you see emerging as potential leaders?
It's a very polite way of saying that. I appreciate that. We're clearly in a transition here coming off of President Obama. This happens periodically in politics. I don't think it's anything worth panicking over, but we have a lot of young leaders that are emerging. I clearly am trying to play my role in playing some form of leadership within the party, but we got guys like Seth Moulton and Hakeem Jeffries and Cedric Richmond coming out of New Orleans. Linda Sanchez is in our House leadership out of California. So there are young leaders that are starting to emerge within our caucus and within our party. And over time, they're going to be on TV more, and people like them when they hear what they have to say. But it is a new generation of leadership.
Congressman Ryan, this is Eddie Glaude. In the New York Times today, there's a wonderful editorial about the real civil war in the Democratic Party, that it's not really a conflict between those on the quote-unquote far left and those in the center, that it's really a difference or a divide between those who are invested in our current institutions and those who are deeply suspicious of those institutions. So folks who are really skeptical about democracy as such. What do you make of that distinction? Is that the real civil war in the Democratic Party, on your view?
Well, we have a lot of issues we're discussing. I think that is one of them. That a lot of people, especially I think when you get into the heartland, I think you get into the South, there are suspicions about the institutions and about the party. And this is when I talk about our brand isn't necessarily connecting in those areas. That's what I mean by that. It's that our people think that the Democrats haven't delivered for them over time. Now, the argument I would make is that in many ways we have, with health care, with covering 20 million more people, with some of the things we did when we were in charge. But clearly there's this huge economic gap, the gap between the rich and the poor, the lack of manufacturing jobs, the way automation is coming and hitting cities like ours. We have $1 billion steel mill in Youngstown. There's about 400 people that work there. You imagine $1 billion steel mill in 1950, it would employ tens of thousands of people. So we still got to wrap our arms around it. And I think that's where the Democrats really have an opportunity. Trump's not presenting any really structural changes to the economy on how he's going to help working class people get back to work and then also change the trajectory of the economy for the next generation. So the Democrats have a very wide opening here. He can do all the rallies he wants, and he can throw the red meat at the base and talk about Mount Rushmore and Lincoln and all the rest. But at the end of the day, in 18 months and then in 3.5 years, people are going to judge him on what has he done. And he's not proposing anything that's going to structurally change. So we've got to step in as Democrats and say, look, we're the party of solutions in the new economy, and that can help heal that rift that we have within the party.
Congressman Tim Ryan, thank you very much for being on the show this morning.
Thanks for having me.
And John Meacham, thank you as well. Just one side note, you are the most presidential of our presidential historians, just FYI. Coming up, and you are only one. Paul Manafort met privately with staff.